Yes, indeedy, folks. It's the Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. Throughout history, there have been few stories more terrifying than those of floods. We are creatures that must have water, and fresh water at that. For that reason, all civilizations have had great flood stories. These stories have been passed down on paper and in drawings to tell us the devastating history of our cultures. But today, we are not going to look at the histories of civilizations. We are not going to look at histories that were written on paper. Instead, we go back to the histories that were written in stone. Thanks to geologists learning to read this history, we now know of the world's greatest river floods. They are fascinating stories, and with the whole world as a place to happen, they occurred within a few hundred miles of each other. So let's start with the world's second greatest flood ever, shall we? Today, we know this lake as the Great Salt Lake. And it is a great lake. As far as area goes, it's the 37th largest lake on Earth. However, between 32,000 and 14,000 years ago, the lake was a little more impressive. Today, we call what was once a massive body of water Bonneville Lake. It was over 1,000 feet deep. In comparison, today's Salt Lake averages 33 feet deep. Lake Bonneville covered some 20,000 square miles. Salt Lake covers under 2,000. If the shoreline of Lake Bonneville had been stretched into a straight line, it would have easily reached New Orleans. At the time of Lake Bonneville, the West was a much wetter place. The polar ice cap came all the way down to northern Idaho. Lake Bonneville filled and filled this great basin until it met a place where it could drain into a river system. Today, we call this place where Lake Bonneville began to drain north into the Snake River system Red Rock Pass. The story of the second largest flood in the geologic history of the Earth rests with the history of what happened at Red Rock Pass. To get to Red Rock Pass, we drive south from Pocatello on Interstate 15. At Downey, we turn south on Highway 91, heading toward Preston. Even before reaching Red Rock Pass, we begin to see the two large hillsides that are on the east and west side of the pass. Looking at the pass from above these hillsides, we can see that the hillsides are not the edges of Red Rock Pass, but rather features that are in Red Rock Pass. Red Rock Pass itself is 3/4 of a mile wide. During the thousands of years of Lake Bonneville, the pass was filled with 300 feet of soft gravel and sand. To get a feeling for how much fill this 300 feet high by 3/4 of a feet wide is, let's take a look at Lucky Peak Dam. More specifically, let's forget about the little extension that goes over the hill and goes to the spillway. Instead, let's just look at the main fill, the part that says, "Keep your forests green." Lucky Peak Dam is 340 feet. They never fill the dam completely full, of course, so basically what we're considering is the height of the dam up to the water line. The width of the main fill at Lucky Peak is about 1/3 of the distance across Red Rock Pass. What caused the second largest flood in the geologic history of the world was that this 300 feet by 3/4 mile long of fill got eroded away and washed down the Snake River. 14,500 years ago, this fill that used to be gravel and sand gave way and was filled with moving water. It is calculated that the amount of water going through Red Rock Pass and heading down the Snake River Canyon was 3 times the flow of the largest river on Earth today. 3 times the flow of the Amazon River. Compared to the normal flow that now goes through the Colorado River, this flood was flowing 4,000 times as much water. From Red Rock Pass, the flood followed the valley down to what we today call the Portneuf River, past Pocatello, and onto the Snake River system. The amount of water was so great that at Twin Falls, where this bridge spans the Snake River Canyon, the water not only had the canyon full, it was spreading out onto the land above the canyon rim. While a 300-foot deep by 3/4 mile long opening as a drain in a bathtub is a lot of water pouring through, it was still a constrained amount. And Lake Bonneville was so huge that in order to drain that 300 feet, it took months. In Lake Bonneville, we can see where there are different shorelines. Anyone who's been to Salt Lake and the surrounding area has looked up at the hills and seen where there are obvious water lines on the hill. There are 2 prominent water lines on the hills above the Salt Lake Valley. The higher of these prominent shorelines was indeed the shoreline of Lake Bonneville. That's as deep as it got. The second highest dominant shoreline is the Provo shoreline. The Provo shoreline is the level of Lake Bonneville after it had drained out at Red Rock Pass. Literally, the Bonneville shoreline was the top of the fill at Red Rock Pass, and the Provo shoreline was the level of the bedrock underneath Red Rock Pass. After the flood, the lake stayed at the Provo shoreline for thousands of years, with an outlet at Red Rock Pass. As the weather got warmer and drier, gradually, over an 8,000-year period, the lake dried up to what we now know as Salt Lake. The great flood that was released through Red Rock Pass released 600 cubic miles of water. 1 cubic mile is a lot of water. 1 mile wide by 1 mile deep by 1 mile tall. That's a lot of water. At Lucky Peak, we measure water by acre feet, which is 1 square acre, 1 foot deep. At Lucky Peak, there are 300,000 acre feet. In the meantime, there are 3,379,000 acre feet in a cubic mile. That means that all the water that we can stuff into Lucky Peak Reservoir is less than 10% of 1 cubic mile. The 600 cubic miles that drained during the Bonneville flood is equal to 5 times the water in Lake Erie. It is roughly equal to half the water in Lake Michigan. Because that much water was being constrained to passing through an opening that was, quote, only 3/4 of a mile wide by 300 feet deep, or the size of 3 Lucky Peak dams, it is estimated that a huge flow continued down the Snake River for up to 90 days, 3 months of these canyons being completely filled with roaring, rushing water. As the lake emptied, the river would be running high for up to a year. One effect of this interaction between rock and water is a geologic wonder that we take for granted in southern Idaho, but is really very rare. Indeed, this wonder is what got geologists looking at the landscape and saying, "Hey, what happened here?" As the water roared through these canyons, it ripped the rock out of the canyon walls. As we know from having driven through the canyons around Idaho, this rock was very, very angular. The force of the water, of course, was so strong that the rocks did not lay on the bottom of the canyons, but instead were pushed along the canyon floor. There were so many rocks being pushed along the floor that it is speculated that if you could have stood on the canyon walls, you would have heard the rushing water, and under it you would have heard the rumble of these rocks. It took no time at all to knock all the rough edges off of these rocks as they rumbled along the canyon floors. What looks like centuries of erosion is actually but a few minutes of being tossed about in a flood. When you look at sandbars or any other place where water slows down, you know that moving water pushes sand and gravel along, and as soon as it slows down where the water widens out, it begins to drop these deposits. The larger particles of sand and gravel stop first. The lighter ones keep being pushed along, and of course, the very light sediment we call mud has to have a really still water in order to settle out. These rocks, which we today call melon gravel because of their shape and because they were treated like gravel during the flood, reacted exactly like sand. As soon as the narrow canyons opened up, the heavier boulders were deposited first, and the further you go away from the canyon, you will see these melon gravel getting smaller and smaller. They go from the size of a small school bus to the size of a basketball. There were many places along the Snake River that the canyons opened up and the flood deposited melon gravel. One excellent example was around King Hill. If you take the old Highway 30 along King Hill, you can still see the old Stinker Station sign that told folks, "Idaho watermelon, take one home to your mother-in-law." Another excellent place to see melon gravel is at Celebration Park. At Celebration Park, the canyon was just beginning to open up. Here at Celebration Park are the largest boulders, which were deposited first as the water slowed just a little bit. They weigh 1.5 tons. Some of these boulders have a very unique feature, and that is when you tap on them, they sing or they make a sound. It is on these rocks that the Indians carved the petroglyphs for which Celebration Park is famous. Over the 14,000 years since this flood, the area in between the stones has been filled in with blowing dust and dirt. So today it looks like these rocks are sitting on top of soil. Nothing could be further from the truth. The truth is that these rocks are the top of a vast sand pile made of stones that weigh 1.5 tons. The rocks go down hundreds of feet of a sandbar made of giant stones, deposited by the world's second largest river flood. A unique geologic feature that stretches all the way across southern Idaho. Besides the melon gravel and petroglyphs, there's another reason to visit Celebration Park, and that's the historic Guffey Bridge. When it was built, Guffey Bridge was the highest railroad bridge in the nation. Only 5 companies had the expertise to bid to build it. Such were the effects of the Great Flood. However, what about the cause of it? Actually, there are 2 different stories. The first story we're going to call the Rockin' Erosion. This theory says that for many, many centuries, for tens of thousands of years, Lake Bonneville would overflow at Red Rock Pass in a rather orderly stream that went down the Pointneuf River. So the question is, why did the 300 feet of soft earth fill wash out? The Rockin' Erosion theory says that there was a layer of solid rock over this 300 feet of soft gravel. This layer of rock may or may not have covered the entire soft gravel area. However, it did cover where the lake was exiting and keeping the lake at a certain level. Lake Bonneville was around for 18,000 years before the flood. That means for 18,000 years, there was erosion at this spot where the lake was flowing over rock. Eventually, the rock eroded through and let water begin to move through the 300 feet of soft gravel. Anyone who has seen water flow through soft gravel and sand knows how quickly they wash away once they are given an opportunity. It would have taken no time at all, a day at the most, to wash out this huge fill. The second explanation of how it came that this massive amount of dirt washed away is what I call the Bear influence. It has to do with the Bear River. In this theory, Bonneville Lake never got to where it went through Red Rock Pass, at least not normally. Perhaps once or twice it had gotten high enough to trickle through the pass, but for the most part, it evaporated or found some other way to maintain its level. At the time, Bear River flew north to the Snake River through what is now called the Pointneuf River. Some 15,000 years ago, a lava flow from the north came and dammed up the Bear River. This lava dam forced the Bear River to flow into another channel where it began contributing to Lake Bonneville. According to this theory, this water coming in from the Bear River was enough to tip the balance in Lake Bonneville. Suddenly, Lake Bonneville began to fill. Before long, the lake reached the level of Red Rock Pass and began permanently flowing over Red Rock Pass down into the old channel of the Bear River. The flood may have been caused by this permanent water flowing over this soft sand and gravel and washing it away, Or with the lake up against this earth dam, the water may have found leaks through the gravel and washed it out from within, a process called piping. Whether by weaknesses in the structure of the sand and gravel or by washing it away from flowing over the top, it quickly gave way and created the second largest flood ever. So, I can hear you say, enough about the second greatest river flood ever. Tell me about the greatest river flood ever. Well, folks, to check out the world's greatest river flood ever, all we have to do is go a few hundred miles up toward Clark Fork, Idaho. Unfortunately, telling the rest of this story and about the amazing flood that covered North Idaho and eastern Washington and all the way down the Columbia River takes more time than I have in the rest of this show. So we'll go look at that flood next week. In the meantime, let's take a little better look at Red Rock Pass. This is sort of a review from last week's show. Here we are heading toward Red Rock Pass. By the bugs on the windshield, you can tell that we have been driving through some fertile, beautiful eastern Idaho country. From the earliest day, this pass has been used by wagon roads, the railroad, the highway, and, obviously, by the power company. Today, reaching Red Rock Pass, we take Highway 15 south from Pocatello to the Highway 91 exit at Downey and head toward Preston. At Red Rock Pass, there is this historic sign, and right behind the historic sign, there is this mound of earth that was left when the pass washed through. Here's a little panorama of the pass to give you an idea of exactly where the mound of earth is and its size in relationship to what else is in the pass. As you can see, there is a cement stairway going up this little mound. In order to take a nice panoramic view of the entire Red Rock Pass, let's just dash up the stairs, shall we? Believe me, folks, dashing up the stairs is more comfortable than dashing down. At the top of the stairs, we find a monument to a Mormon pioneer. And from the top of this little knoll, we take a panoramic view all the way around Red Rock Pass. We start looking east. Here we are looking to the north. We would have been looking at the water rushing away from us if we'd been here during the flood. Except, of course, we would have been way, way under the water if we had been here. To the west, here we're coming toward the south, where the lake would have been. And back toward the east. And now, a flash of a story. And who better to introduce us to a flash of a story than this guy? Our friendly neighborhood flasher tells us the story of the perfect 9. Old Ted, he was a perfectly good guy, and he enjoyed going out for a few brews after work. So one day he wanders into the local tavern. The first thing he notices is a group of ladies that he hasn't seen before, and they're all sitting and chatting and seeming to have a good time. He notices that they also notice him. It just happened that in order to get over to the table where his buddy George was sitting, he had to walk within earshot of the ladies. And as he walked by, he heard the lady in red say 9. And all of his girlfriends seemed to agree. 9, 9, yes indeed, definitely 9. Well, Ted was beside himself. Dude, he said as soon as he got over to George. See those ladies over there? Buddy, they think I'm a perfect 9, especially the lady in red. Well, George was a good friend, and he played along. But it wasn't long before he got a little tired of Ted strutting around like a peacock, bragging about being a 9, and he says, come on, give me a break. You're telling me that lady in red thinks you're a 9? I kind of find it hard to believe there, Ted, buddy. George also knew that Ted was too shy to ever go and talk with the ladies, so he decided, I'm going to just go check this out. And sure enough, he went over and started chatting with the ladies. And almost as soon as he got there, he started laughing and laughing and laughing. As George came back to the table, Ted couldn't wait to hear what he had to say. What'd they say? What'd they say, dude? George assured him, well, Ted, buddy, they do think you're a 9. There's no doubt about that. The only problem is, they're German. And that's this week's Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next week. And in the meantime, keep celebrating the Great Wahoo.